What if penguins are not supposed to exist? Birds were built for the sky, hollow bones, feathers, wings designed for flight. Almost everything about birds evolved around escaping gravity. Yet penguins did something almost no other bird ever has. They gave it up. Somehow, a flying seabird transformed into one of the most efficient hunters in the ocean. Along the way, penguins became giants, crossed entire oceans, survived mass extinctions, and conquered some of the harshest environments on Earth. But the strangest part is this: the modern penguin still carries evidence of its flying past hidden inside its body today. And that may make penguins one of evolution's strangest compromises, because to conquer the sea, they sacrificed the sky. Long before penguins conquered the oceans, they were simply birds. Small seabirds about the size of a chicken living along the southern coastlines of an ancient Earth. And like almost all birds, they could fly. At the time, flight was one of the greatest survival advantages in nature. The world was still dangerous. Large reptiles were gone, but mammals were rapidly evolving and spreading across the planet. Early predators such as crocodile-like reptiles, giant flightless birds, and carnivorous mammals hunted across forests and coastlines. Being able to launch into the sky meant survival. Flight also allowed these birds to travel enormous distances, searching for food, escaping danger, and finding nesting grounds. And despite how different penguins look today, they were still birds in almost every recognizable way. They laid eggs, built nests, raised chicks, and likely gathered in large coast colonies, much like many seabirds today. Scientists believe these early ancestors probably nested on rocky shorelines and isolated coastal areas rather than deep forests. Their bodies were already becoming adapted for life near the ocean, because even then, the sea was becoming more important to their survival. The southern oceans were overflowing with fish, and unlike the skies above, the water below had surprisingly little competition. Some of these birds began diving more frequently, at first only briefly, just enough to chase fish beneath the surface. But over time, the birds that swam better ate more, survived longer, raised more offspring, and slowly, one of evolution's strangest transformations began. The better these birds became underwater, the worse they became in the sky, and without realizing it. The ancestors of penguins had started moving toward a completely different world, not the air above them, but the ocean below. 60 million years ago, the giant reptiles that once ruled the oceans were gone. The ancient seas were changing. Fish populations were exploding. And the oceans had not yet established the balance of predator and prey seen today, which created an enormous opportunity. Some of these early birds began spending more and more time underwater, at first only briefly, diving beneath the surface to chase fish before returning to the sky. But generation after generation, their bodies began changing. Long wings designed for gliding slowly shortened into compact, powerful flippers. Their muscles strengthened. Their bodies became heavier. Their bones grew denser. Because unlike flying birds, these animals no longer benefited from staying light. They needed weight to propel themselves deeper underwater and across longer distances. And water is nearly 800 times denser than air, meaning every movement required enormous strength and efficiency. Penguins needed power underwater, not lift in the sky, and with few predators waiting beneath the surface, the need to fly and escape became less important. So, over millions of years, penguins traded diving through the skies for diving through the sea. Their feathers became sleek and waterproof. Their bodies became streamlined like torpedoes, and eventually they crossed a point of no return. They could no longer take to the air, but now an entire ocean stretched out in front of them, vast, rich with life, and almost completely open. Penguins expanded across the southern world, and some became giants. If humans could travel back in time, they would be looking up at penguins along the coasts of New Zealand and Antarctica, which is difficult to imagine, because the penguins people see in zoos today were once giants. Some stood nearly 6 to 7 feet tall and weighed close to 200 pounds. Fossils discovered in New Zealand and Antarctica revealed birds that would tower over both early and modern humans at one point. Penguins were not the cute survivors of Antarctica. They were among the dominant animals of the southern oceans, and at the time, giant penguins thrived in a very different ocean. The era of the giant penguin existed millions of years before the massive marine predators that dominate today's seas. Whales had not yet evolved into ocean giants, seals barely existed, and many large sharks had not yet become dominant hunters, which created an extraordinary opportunity. Larger bodies became advantageous. They stored more oxygen, conserved heat more efficiently, and allowed penguins to dive into deeper, colder waters while traveling enormous distances during long hunts. For millions of years, giant penguins thrived, and as they spread through the southern oceans, penguins began conquering enormous parts of the world. They expanded across Antarctica, New Zealand, South America, Australia, and eventually parts of southern Africa. Ocean currents carried them across vast distances, and wherever cold, nutrient-rich waters existed, penguins followed. At one point, penguins became some of the most successful marine birds on Earth, but this age would not last forever, because the oceans were beginning to change. The rise of marine mammals changed everything. Whales evolved, seals appeared, new predators began dominating the oceans, and suddenly, giant penguins were no longer the hunters, they were prey. Large size stopped being an advantage. Large penguins became easier targets for the new predators. Catching one 200-pound penguin required far less energy than chasing hundreds of smaller fish. So evolution adjusted again. Penguins began getting smaller. Smaller penguins could turn faster, escape quicker, use less energy. Penguins became leaner, their bodies transformed into near-perfect swimming machines. And while the oceans were becoming more dangerous, life on land was slowly becoming safer. The massive predators that once dominated the ancient world were disappearing and evolving into many of the animals recognized today. In the southern hemisphere, land became increasingly safe. Unlike the northern hemisphere, polar bears, wolves, and foxes never evolved across most penguin habitats. Ironically, one of the greatest threats to penguin colonies became birds that could still fly. Large seabirds circled overhead looking for eggs and chicks. But in the rare moments penguins needed to escape danger, they no longer escaped upward, they escaped downward into the ocean, a world where few land predators could follow. The coast had become their home, and the ocean had become their hunting ground. Over millions of years, the penguin recognized today had finally taken shape. And even now, modern penguins are astonishing athletes. Some species can dive over 1,500 feet deep. Others can remain underwater for more than 20 minutes. They launch themselves from the water using a technique called porpoising, leaping through the air to breathe while maintaining incredible speed. And this may be the strangest part of all. What looks awkward on land becomes almost graceful underwater. Penguins might be one of the few apex hunters on Earth that humans describe as adorable. They waddle, slip across the ice, bump into each other, and somehow look completely harmless doing it. On land, penguins seem awkward, almost clumsy, even goofy. But the moment a penguin enters the ocean, everything changes. The waddling disappears, and suddenly the penguin becomes fast, precise, powerful. This combination may be exactly why humans find them so lovable. We smile as they innocently slip across ice and rocky beaches, and are amazed as they glide through the water for an animal so perfectly adapted to the ocean. Penguins spend a surprising amount of their lives on land, and this reveals something important about evolution. Evolution does not create perfect animals. It creates animals optimized for survival. Penguins sacrificed flight for swimming, and in doing so, they became specialists. As predators on land disappeared, penguins no longer needed to become faster walkers or stronger runners. Their future was no longer tied to the land. It was tied to the ocean, but the world itself was changing again. The planet continued cooling, continents drifted farther apart, and the warm coastal forests where penguins first entered the sea slowly began freezing over. But if penguins evolved in warmer climates, why are they associated with Antarctica? Because Antarctica itself changed. Millions of years ago, Antarctica was not frozen. It contained forests, rivers, ancient wildlife. But over time, the continent drifted southward. The Earth cooled as carbon dioxide levels slowly declined. Ice spread across Antarctica. This changing, brutal habitat forced many animals native to Antarctica to migrate or disappear. Penguins stayed. The oceans surrounding Antarctica were still rich with fish, and although the world was getting colder, the land itself remained relatively safe. But now penguins faced a completely different challenge. Surviving the cold, their feathers became more densely packed and waterproof. Their bodies developed thick layers of fat. Their circulation systems evolved to conserve heat, and perhaps most importantly, penguins learned to survive together. Emperor penguins huddle in colonies of thousands during brutal Antarctic winters. Temperatures can fall below -50 degrees Celsius. Winds can exceed 100 miles per hour. Yet by constantly rotating positions within the huddle, the colony survives. Penguins protect their eggs by balancing them above the ice and sheltering chicks deep within these massive huddles. Not because one penguin is strong enough, but because thousands work together. They did not just survive Antarctica, they conquered it. For tens of millions of years, penguins survived changing climates, predators, collapsing ecosystems, and shifting oceans. Today they face something new. A predator that has conquered both the land and the sea us. Climate change is rapidly altering Antarctic ice. Melting ice sheets disrupt traditional emperor penguin breeding grounds. As oceans warm, fish populations begin shifting farther away. Penguins must now travel longer distances to hunt, and although penguins remain relatively safe on land, the more time they spend hunting in the ocean, the more vulnerable they become to marine predators. In some regions, penguins now compete directly against commercial fishing fleets. The ocean that became their hunting ground is also becoming polluted. Plastic drifting through the water can be mistaken for food. Humans have also settled near penguin colonies across the Galapagos Islands, Argentina, New Zealand, and South Africa. And with humans came dogs, wild boar, and invasive animals. Penguins never evolved needing to escape. The penguin's awkwardness on land, once harmless, can now become a weakness. Some penguin colonies are shrinking, and as of April 2026, the emperor penguin was officially classified as endangered by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. For the first time in millions of years, the greatest threat to penguins is not a predator in the ocean, it is us. Penguins began as flying birds in a warm, prehistoric world. Over millions of years, they gave up the sky and transformed into masters of the ocean. They became giants, crossed entire oceans, and conquered much of the southern world. They survived the warm post-Jurassic Earth, the cooling of Antarctica, the Ice Age, and every environmental challenge in between. They are remarkably resilient animals, and somehow, despite surviving one of the harshest evolutionary journeys on Earth, they still make humans smile. Today, we are watching an animal caught between two worlds, a world it evolved for, and a world changing faster than evolution can easily follow. If evolution teaches us anything, it is that every new challenge brings change, and who knows what the future holds for penguins. Maybe one day, the descendants of penguins will return to the skies.